Hello everyone, and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Marilyn, and I'm so glad you stopped by, especially today, because I'm going to do a video about my 5 best books of my 5 years on booktube. And believe me, that wasn't easy, because I must have read about 800 to 1,000 books in these past 5 years. And I realized a lot of things while I was picking the books, why those books stood out for me. And these aren't rereads or anything like that. These are 5 books that I picked out of all of the books that I've read. Before I go into that, I just wanted to say that last Sunday was my 75th birthday, and that's why I was sort of missing in action for about a week. And my best friend gave me a plumera necklace to honor also not only my 75th year, but my plumera tree that is also 40-something years. I have a plumera tree that that was given to me when my son was born. So this is the real plumera, and this is the necklace plumera. But it smells really good, but just letting you know that it doesn't last too long, like many other flowers that are given as leis. So you have to appreciate it at the moment. But back to what I was saying, I'm 75 now. I started my booktube channel when I was 70, and I have grown as a reader so much, thanks to people in the community, booktubers that I watch, friends that I've met here, subscribers, friends. And I realized when I picked these 5 books that the reason that I picked them was because they resonated with something about my life. And that was really eye-opening for me, because I never realized that when I read a book, that the books that I was drawn to, and these are all different books there's 2 translated fiction here, so it's not that they're about me or my life, but something in them, some topic resonated with me. So let's get on to the 5 best books on my 5 years of booktube. The first book was a revelation to me, as all of these books were. Like I said, they weren't rereads. And this was a favorite book of one of the 5 years that I've been on booktube. But it's very interesting, because it wasn't the book it's 2 books in one. So it's Passing and Quicksand, and this says Quicksand and Passing by Nella Larsen. And let me show you the cover. And this was written in 1928. And let me just tell you a little bit about Passing, even though that's not the book that's on my top 5 books. It's Quicksand. But let me tell you about Passing. Passing is about 2 women living in Renaissance Harlem, New York, in the 20s, probably the early 20s. And they're light-skinned, and one is passing as a white woman. In fact, she's married to a white man who's a racist, which just sounds horrible. And the other one just passes occasionally because she's, some people just think she's white and she goes along with it, but she's living her authentic life. And although I really liked that book, I resonated more with Quicksand, the second book, it's the first book on here. Of course, I read both, and this was my favorite, book, 2 books in one, of that year. And I don't remember the year. But, so what is Quicksand about? Quicksand is about Helga. She's a mixed race woman, biracial, of Danish and Black American. And she's searching for meaning and a sense of belonging. But she finds herself continually misrepresented or dissatisfied. And of course, this was the 1920s also. So we had so much going on. But this book was really a revelation to me because it talked also not only about racial identity, but cultural identity. And that resonated with me because I'm also bicultural in that my father is Puerto Rican and my mother was Jewish. So I really resonated with a lot of the problems that she encountered. Of course, I wasn't born in the 20s. I'm not that old. So this is such an interesting book because she travels. So we're traveling with her in the restrictive early 20th century American society and also Harlem Renaissance. And we go to Southern Black School, Denmark, and back to Harlem. And she feels this persistent feeling of alienation. And growing up in Brooklyn, I also felt that feeling of alienation, of being, as it's called, a third culture kid, where you have two cultures and yet you're living in the third culture, which whatever is American culture. And so it really resonated with me, even though, of course, this is 1920s and women didn't have the freedom that they have now. But it really was, the book is a very modern look at what women went through in the 1920s. And like I said, I resonated with Quicksand. I have to say that both Passing and Quicksand, I did not like the endings. And that's not something that is only me. When I read reviews about a book after I read it, I want to see if other people think that the ending was not what it could have been. But I love both of these books, and I recommend them very highly. So that's how I picked this book, because I related to it. I felt seen in some way. And all of these books have that in common. So what's the second book? Now, I want to say that all of these 5 books are mine. I own them except for one. And the one and I would reread them except for one. So what is the one I wouldn't reread, and why? But why is it on my 5 best list? And that would be Heaven by Mieko Kawakami. Oh, this book made me cry. 2 books in these 5 favorite books made me cry. And yeah, I wasn't expecting it in both of these books that I would cry. So what is Heaven about? Heaven is about a boy who's around, let me see how old he is. He's 14 years old, and he's subjected to relentless torment by his classmates. It's mostly taking place in a school. So it's about bullying. And why did I relate to this? I was bullied, but this is really extreme bullying. We're talking bullying, and I'm going to go into the different aspects of this book, why it's so extreme. But he was called Eyes by his bullies because he had a lazy eye. In fact, in 2 of these books, the protagonist has lazy eyes, and I have a lazy eye. So I was bullied because of my lazy eye. But back to Heaven. It's not only about his bullying, which is extreme. It's also about Japanese culture. Now, this book is from the library. I don't own this novel, but let me just show you the cover. So I read some reviews about this book. Why is it so extreme? And the author explained that as adults, we sometimes forget what it feels like to be a child. And she wanted to bring that feeling of being bullying, or maybe the person had bullied someone, or how the bully feels in an extreme way, which he does. And like I said, in some parts it's almost hard to read. And also because it's a translated book, and it's translated by Sam Bett and David Boyd. I always like to mention the translators. And she said that, well, I lived in Japan, and I know that bullying is very, very, it's a taboo, almost a taboo subject. People don't tell, and this boy did not tell. But he made a friend with another so-called misfit, and they were both bullied. And it goes into a lot of theology. It goes into not only bullying, and we don't really know why he doesn't tell his parents, and he doesn't tell anyone. And when Kojima, she's the person, they become friends, but she tries to convince him that they're getting stronger. They're going to be strong by accepting the bullying and not fighting back, not telling their parents that they're being bullied, and that they will become like heaven. So that's where the heaven comes from. The ending is almost it's so hard to take. I could barely read this book, so I think you have to be know in the beginning of reading this book that it's going to be hard to read, because some of the bullying is so extreme and so sad, and we feel for the two children that are being bullied, and we want to do something. We want to save them, and I think that's what the author was trying to do, was trying to say, do something about the bullying. Don't just ask questions, help. And it also has a very Japanese theme about it, a Japanese feeling about it. And I think I told you I was a teacher in Japan. I never witnessed bullying. I think it goes on more in the public schools, and I taught in private school. But this book made me cry, it made me think, and that's why it's my top 5 books of 5 years on BookTube. Now the next book made me cry as well, but for a different reason. And I won't talk too much about this because it's a very small book. In fact, it was in a magazine first, excerpt? Tell me if I'm saying that word right. It's Foster by Clare Keegan. And all I'll say, it's a child growing up in rural Ireland. And she's taken by, her mother is pregnant, they're very poor, and she's taken by her father to live with her mother's sister and her husband. And so she doesn't really know if she's going home, who these people are really. And it goes, I think it's goes throughout one summer where a lot of things happen, and she experiences kindness and a sense of maybe being her own individual for the first time in her life. And that's all I'll say about it, but it made me cry at the end, and it was unexpected. I didn't think that it was going to end the way it does. I'm not going to, of course, tell you what the ending is, but I cried. And Clare Keegan is a wonderful writer. I read many books that she read, but this is my favorite, and I will never forget this book. I have it this is a library book, but I have it in another form. So I suggest very highly that you read Foster. Now, I said I could relate to all of the books in some way, but in this book, you don't have to relate. I was born sort of poor, not as poor as these people in the book, but I just related to the writing and to the feeling and to the beauty of the writing in this book. So that's the way I connected to this book. Okay, so what's the third book? The third book is a book by Barbara Pym. Now, if you haven't read Barbara Pym, I suggest you start right away. It's a book that and all of these books are books that I would never have found if I hadn't joined BookTube on my 70th birthday. These books, these authors made me grow in so many different ways. And Barbara Pym, Quartet in Autumn, is one of those books. I mean, I showed you this book many, many times if you ever watch my channel. But you might not know Quartet in Autumn by Barbara Pym. You might know Excellent Women, where she's most known for. And so she was a writer since she was 16, and she's the most, Philip Larkin said she's the most underrated writer of the century. And I think that now she's not underrated anymore, at least on BookTube, that's for sure. And I think Quartet in Autumn, well, no, the Lonesome Dove died, she died in like 78, and here's a picture of her that I really like, and this was from Excellent Women. Okay, so why do I like Quartet in Autumn the best of all her books? What is it about? Okay, Quartet in Autumn, why I related to this book, it's about 4 co-workers who are of a certain age, I think maybe in their 50s, and this is during 1970s London. And London is going through post-war years. This is when all the music came out, when the hippies started, and they're sort of looking over their lives and what they missed. And yeah, she has a sense of time and place, as well as her dark humor, that really, really is enjoyable in all of her books. If you've never read Barbara Pym, maybe start with Excellent Women. But for an older woman, this was my favorite book, because not only is it, like you said, black humor, blackly funny and full of obstinate optimism, it shows her sensitive artistry in sparkling, the most sparkling. And I agree with that, because I read all of her books. I did. There was only one that I really couldn't get along with, and mostly she writes about the church and the curates and the ministers and all these excellent women in this book who help, who do all these things for the church, and how sometimes maybe that wasn't such a good thing. But if you've not read Barbara Pym, this was a delight for me on BookTube to be introduced to Barbara Pym, and it has to be one of the 5 favorite books. And like I said, it is Quartet in Autumn. The writing is beautiful, it's funny, it's witty, it's dark, it's everything. Okay, so what is the next book? Oh, so how do I relate to Quartet in Autumn? Of course, I'm not in England, and that's the wonderful part about relating to a book and not being part of that society, that time. It doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter, as long as something about it relates. And in this book, it was feeling like you missed the boat. And if you lived 75 years, you might feel, when I was young, we didn't have cell phones and streaming, and we had none of that, as we say in Brooklyn, none of that. So these are 4 people who also feel that they're missing the boat, that they're not of the generation that's happening, and they're lonely. It's about loneliness, and we've all felt lonely. So that's what I related to this, why I related to this book. Now, the next book is a very special. It's also a series, and I should mention that some of these are series, like Barbara Pym. Well, no, this is not a series, but these are standalone books, but they have a similar theme. All of her books have a similar theme, and that is kind of the church. But this book, that's almost my favorite book, is a series. And it's also a translated woman fiction. And her name is Cora Sandel. And it was my favorite book of one of those 5 years, and it's called Alberta and Jacob. And yes, Cora Sandel did have a lazy eye as well, but that is not only, this is her when she was older, and she always had ways of covering her eye, and I related to that. I used to have very long hair, and I used to cover my eye like that. But all of her books, she didn't like to take photos, obviously. She would not do well in this generation where everybody is taking selfies of everybody else. But I loved all 3 books, but I picked, and I loved them for different reasons. And this one is the first of the series, and it's Alberta and Jacob. And it's funny because Jacob doesn't really appear in this at all. Jacob is her brother. So what is it about? Now this takes place, which shows you that you can relate to a book no matter where it's taken place or when. And this is also largely autobiographical. And it follows Alberta Selmer, and she's a young, intelligent, very sensitive, and also has social anxiety, which though I don't have social anxiety, I can relate to anxiety in general. She's anxious, and she's trapped in a stifling provincial town in northern Norway. Now, how could I relate to someone born years before I was born in a real place called Tromsø? It's not talked about that it's Tromsø, which is like really north in Norway. I think you can see the northern lights from there. And also it talks about this is her childhood. She comes from an unhappy home, and she wants to escape, but she doesn't know how. And that's what I related to in this book. How you can feel like you're not part of a stifling community, or parents who don't understand you, and also having a lazy eye, so maybe you don't want to be seen in that way. And I really related to that. And she has a quiet internal rebellion to escape. In fact, her second book is Alberta and Freedom, where she really, in real life, she does escape. Like I said, this is very autobiographical, and it's been compared to Madame Bovary and Anna Karenina, which I think I read Madame Bovary, but I haven't read Anna Karenina. And it's about a young woman's rebellion. And it's universally regarded as one of the greatest novels to come from Scandinavia. Her writing, let me just say, if you don't like anything that I said about it, her writing is just so beautiful. The way she talks about the place that she's from makes you just feel like you're there. And I wanted to find something. You can just look at any page and find beautiful writing. And I just turned to this page. In clear weather, rounded, solid mountains, blue and distant, formed a wall in the far north of the province. Now there was nothing there, less than nothing, a colorless infinity. I just picked this at random. If you love beautiful writing, you'll love the Alberta and Jacob series by Cora Sandel. It says masterpiece here, and it really is. And I cannot suggest this more highly. And I read two of the other books with Lindy from Lindy's Magpie Reads. We didn't read this book together, but we read Alberta and Freedom and Alberta Alone, and she loved it too. We also read another book out of the series. So please read this book. You'll love it. If you're a reader, you will love it. Okay, now this has to be my favorite book of the 5 years, and I talked about it before. I'm going to do another 5 maybe most surprising books during this sort of celebration of my 5 years on BookTube, but I talked about this book a lot, and I don't think it gets any attention on BookTube, and I don't even know how I found it, but it is a book that I will reread again. It's called Underground in Berlin, and it's by Marie Jalowicz Simon, translated by Anthea Bell. And let me just show you. Not only that, but there's it's a memoir of World War II. Some say it's the best memoir ever of World War II, and that's saying a lot. I mean, this is what she looked like. And it's very important that you look at this picture to understand how she was able to get away with what she literally got away with, and that is surviving, being a Jewish woman in Berlin and surviving and not going to a concentration camp. And it says in 1942, Marie Jalowicz, a Jewish Berliner, decides she will do whatever is in her power to escape the death camps. She removes the Jewish star that Jews were forced to wear, and she assumes a new identity and disappears into Berlin as what they call a U-boater. And that's not what's so exciting about this book. She never talked, the author never talked about what she went through until she was quite old and infirm, and she spoke to her son and told him this book, and he's the one who made sure it was published. It is like a thriller. It reads like a thriller. I mean, the first person I think that she stayed with was a Nazi, an actual Nazi. And he didn't guess, because she did look like a German woman. And in that, she was brave. She took chances. She almost starved. She stayed with circus performers. It reads like you would not believe that a woman can go through this. It has photos in it about some of the circus performers that she stayed with. Now, some of the people knew that she was Jewish. They were communists, but she was very careful about, and there are who she stayed with. Well, sometimes she couldn't be careful, like in the Nazi one. But so this is her in 1945, right after the war. Yeah. So, yeah, being beautiful, young, she was 20 years old, and not looking what they call typically Jewish did help her, but she went through a lot. She went through a lot being a U-boater, but she survived. And survival, is everything. Not too many people survive. So how did I relate to this book? Of course, my mother was Jewish, and of course we lost people in the Holocaust. I have great aunts that I never met because they didn't want to leave Europe when they had the chance to leave Europe. And that's also a sad thing, because a lot of people didn't believe this could happen. So, we need to look at history to know that, anything can happen, and we have to be aware of the situation. So I really love books about people who survive stuff, because if you live 75 years like I have, you've survived stuff. Believe me, you have survived stuff. And no, I've never had to escape Berlin. And probably if my grandmother had not sent my great-grandmother had not sent my grandmother over during the pogroms in Poland, I wouldn't be here right now. So, you know, you have to think of that. And I tell my grandchildren that also. I want them to know all of their ethnicities, all of their history. And I just talked to my granddaughter recently, and she lives in Texas. She's Mexican, Puerto Rican, and Jewish, and telling her what probably no one else can tell her about her mother's side of the family. Anyway, these are my 5 favorite books in my 5 years on BookTube. I hope you enjoyed this video. I am coming back with 5 books I thought I would never read. And a lot of these are books I never heard of. And I'm a reader. I was always a reader. But I tended to stick to genres that I knew I liked, that I was familiar with. And though I did, you know, like I said, I discovered Jane Austen. By the way, I saw Miss Austen on PBS recently, the last episode, and I was sorry that I missed all the other episodes, but I didn't know too much about Jane Austen's sister. I think her name was Cassandra, but I watched the last episode and I was pretty impressed with the acting. Not saying that that was the truth or not, but I discovered Jane Austen by myself is what I'm trying to say. But all these other books that I'm talking about, I never knew about. And so thank you, BookTube, for these 5 years. And I'm glad I'm 75 and I'm alive and I'm still on BookTube. So if you've got this far and you're not subscribed, please think of subscribing and liking this video and saying hi in the comments. And I will be back very soon with another video talking about my 5 years on BookTube and what I've learned and the books that I've read that really blew my mind, as we used to say in the 60s. So until we meet again, aloha oi.